We are on 13b towards the middle, and we're at Rava Amar.
Okay, there.
Rava Amar, Tabayu to Beis Shammai ein iser chalal iser. Rava says that Beis Shammai, who permits co-wives, it's because ein iser chalal iser. Once you have one prohibition, another prohibition you can't have, in this respect, you can't have multiple prohibitions. That's a principle which you can say that principle, but we know there are cases where there will be multiple infractions, but they would have to all be exceptions to this principle. But he suggests there's a basic principle, which is once you have an infraction already present, another one cannot be added to it. So what is the basic prohibition here? The basic prohibition is you're not allowed to marry your sister-in-law, or your sister-in-law is not allowed to marry you. So what are you adding in this case to her? Because she happens to be a co-wife with somebody, you're also adding another prohibition, which is erva. She already had a basic prohibition of sister-in-law, and now you're adding another one on top of her. Tenach hecha de nasa meis and achar kach nasa chat. So the Gemara says, I get it if so you have Ruvain and Shimon. Ruvain is the one who passes away. So he is married, let's say in the case of two sisters. So Ruvain and Shimon are going to marry two sisters, but Ruvain married first. And then Shimon, who's going to be the surviving brother, he married second. So when Ruvain got married, there wasn't anything about that woman that would be forbidden to Shimon. It's only when Shimon chose to marry her sister that we now have an issue, because if Ruvain dies, he can't do Yibum because she will be the sister of his wife. So you would say that this woman, her first relationship to Shimon is prohibited, they're prohibited, but just because of being a sister-in-law. So sister-in-law was their first issue. Then he married her sister, and now on top of sister-in-law, you have that she's his wife's sister. So there, the Gemara is saying that makes sense to say, because sister-in-law was the first layer, we're going to say wife's sister doesn't get added on. She's already prohibited for one reason. We're not going to add on another prohibition. Now, if we say that, well, we're going to say that for the co-wives, that the co-wives have a basic sister-in-law, and we're not going to add another prohibition of wife's sister on top of them, co-wife of a wife's sister. V'achar kach nasa lo asi iser achos isha v'chayel iser eshes ach. So we're going to say that the second prohibition of sisters is not going to take effect because they already have the brothers, the brother-in-law problem. And then once Yibum has, the brother-in-law problem becomes permitted. Ela nosa chai. But if Shimon got married first, so that the woman who Ruvain is going to marry was already forbidden to him because she's the sister of his wife, and Reuven hadn't married her, so she's not his sister-in-law. The one that originally takes effect is that she's the sister of his wife. So if the living one got married first, in other words, Shimon got married first, and then Reuven married her sister, Achos Isha Kadin. Now it was the sister's problem, his wife's sister, and that happened first. And so it shouldn't be erased. Because if you have a principle that one layer of prohibition doesn't go on another one, it's what's you have to figure out is which one happened first. So what's going to happen? Her tzara is going to be the tzara of an erva who cannot do a mitzvah, and she's going to be permitted. What you need is this. You need that if, according to Beis Shammai, if the erva cannot do yibum, according to Beis Shammai, the co-wife is permitted. And in this case, there was never an opportunity for the erva to do yibum because she was a co-wife's sister. She was her sister was married to the prospective Yavam. And before she ever became his sister-in-law, she was already the sister of his wife. And so that's the baseline prohibition. So when Yibum comes, you never get to the fact that she's the sister-in-law. She's been a forbidden woman to him even before the concept of Yibum would have ever come up. And therefore, since she's not considered for Yibum, the tzara is permitted. That's something to meditate on, to let it sink in. But again, the bottom line, according to Beis Shammai, is if that woman, the erva, would have never been able to do Yibum, in a sense, she's not falling for Yibum. She's not in the discussion of Yibum. She couldn't do it. Before she even got married to her husband, she was already disguised. She was forbidden to this guy because her sister was his wife. So she only married her husband after she was already the sister-in-law of the surviving brother. Then she marries her husband. Then her husband dies. So since her first relationship with the surviving Yavam is as his sister-in-law, in other words, his wife's sister, it takes up, that's the prohibition. Once she gets married to her other husband, the fact that she's a sister-in-law now because she's married to his brother is irrelevant because she was already forbidden because she was his wife's sister. So since she's irrelevant, she doesn't really fall to Yibum. And if she doesn't fall to Yibum, this allows for her co-wife to fall to Yibum. Choltzu Beis Shammai poslim. So we had cases back and forth, and there were cases where in one case, if they did chalitza, according to Beis Shammai, they can't marry a Kohen, and according to Beis Hillel, they could. Pshita, isn't that obvious? La'afuke to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. This is to exclude Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. To Amar Bo'u unesake lahem letzarash yu choltzos v'lo misyabmos. Why don't we just make a decree that these women, the co-wives should do chalitza and not yibum? Just because in some of these cases, this way you would fulfill Beis Shammai's concern. Kamash Malon, the Beis Hillel machshirim. So what does this teach you? That we don't do that. Beis Hillel permits them to be Kohanim which means that we're not concerned
Wives
about,
of
the co-wives to marry Kohanim, I'm sorry, to marry Kohanim. So again, what it teaches is that we don't, even though Beis Shammai is a very important opinion, we don't try to cover all our bases in an argument between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. We go like Beis Hillel. Nisyabmu, Beis Hillel, postlin, etc. So we had the other way around. Ha-tu lamali, what do we need these other cases for? Aidi de Tana, Choltsu Tananami Nisyabmu. So since they taught one case that they do Chalitza, we also taught that they do Yibum, even though you didn't really have to teach it. Tnan Hasa. It was taught in Megillah, the Gemara Megillah, Mishnah Megillah on the first page. Didn't think you're going to get to Megillah today. We got to Megillah. And technically this is not the week of Purim, but it's within a week of Purim. That's not the week of Purim. All right.
Really?
It's not awesome. Megillah Nikreis be'achad asar b'shneim asar b'shlosha asar b'arba asar b'chamisha asar lo pachos v'lo yoser. This Mishnah, the beginning of this Mishnah, I saw. In case your mind needed some stretching, I saw this idea from the Vilna Gaon, the Gaon of Vilna. The Vilna Gaon was talking about how there is a revelation of God at the level of what we call Aleph Dad Adnus, which is Adonai, Adnus, and there's a revelation of God at the four-letter name. And the revelation of God in the Adnus one, Adonai, is a revelation that we are more capable of understanding. And the revelation at the four-letter name is sort of above our understanding. We can sort of sense it, but it's above our understanding. So he reads this as follows. Megillah, which is the story of Purim, which is about revealing what is hidden. Megillah is read on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. If you add that up, it adds up to 65, which is the gematria of Aleph Daled Nun Yud. So, and when it says not more and not less, what it means is the earliest is the 11th and the latest is the 25th. That's and the latest is the earliest is the 11th and the latest is the 15th. That adds up to 26, which is the gematria of Yud Hey Vav Hey. So the Megillah is read, it's a revelation of Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, but it's not a revelation of the four-letter name of God at his four-letter name. And that is all implied in this first verse of the Megillah is read on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th, not less and not more. So when he is reading Gemara, that's what he is seeing.
He being
the Gaon of Vilna. As long as our mind was stretched thinking about Reb Chaim Kanievsky, now we can talk about the Vilna Gaon. Can't just talk about the Vilna Gaon, but you can. We don't speak about the Vilna Gaon. I'm pretty sure it was a song by Lin-Manuel Miranda. We don't talk about Bruno.
Right, yeah.
Amalei Reish Lakish Reb Yochanan. Reish Lakish says to Reb Yochanan, Ikre kan losis godadush, losasu agudos agudos. So Reish Lakish says to Reb Yochanan, it says here losis godadu. Now, the truth is losis godadu actually is a verse about not, literally it means not to cut, I think, right? I think literally it means not to cut your body in as a sign of mourning. But it is also learned to mean do not create separate bodies, separate groups. It's quite far afield from each other, these two explanations, but Rabbi Hartman talked about it and suggested that you're making like separations in either case. He had an explanation from Rav Tzadok Cohen about it, but essentially the secondary understanding is that we are not supposed to have different groups within Judaism. You're supposed to have one group. Hi losis godanu mi boile legufe. Don't we need it for itself? The Torah says you're not supposed to wound yourself for the dead. That was the subject of Dr. Henry Abramson yesterday, I think, which was all the different ways they used to scar them. There was tattooing, branding, and wounding themselves. And apparently these were customs that were prevalent in cultures throughout the world. When somebody died, you would demonstrate your sadness about it by wounding yourself. And the message here is, we don't do that. Part of the reason we don't do that is because of our faith that this person is not in a bad place after they die, that they are, that as far as they're concerned, they're happy to be where they are. We miss them, and that's our sadness, but not that there's nothing terrible happened. When the person dies, nothing terrible has happened except for our sadness that we've missed them. Im Kain, Lema Kra, Losis Goder. Yeah, so Rish Lakish says, how can you learn this about not making separate groups amongst the Jewish people? You need it for the verse itself. So the answer is, Im Kain, Lema Kra, Losis Lo Tigodedu. Lo Tisgodedu Lahachi Hudasa. So it's the extra tough. Against these extra letters, which we saw with Litzror, and we saw with the extra hay of Chutza. Again, Rabbi Breidowitz had pointed out, this is not in your 13 principles of Rabbi Shmuel. And we saw that Hillel chose not to learn the one about the extra hay. So apparently, not everybody's always convinced by the extra letter learning, but that's the answer here. There's an extra letter. It says tis go to do. It could have said lo ti go to do without that second tough. So Amarle ad kan lo shanisa makam shanagu lasos malacha barve psachim al chatzos osin makam shanagu shalo lasos ein osin. So now Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, before we got to Megillah, which said in some places you read it on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. We already had in Psachim where it said, if there's a custom to do creative work on Erev Pesach in the noon in a particular town until noon, then you can do it. But if there is a custom not to do it, you're not allowed to do it. In other words, you have to follow the custom of that place. We don't want people doing different customs in the same place, because that would indicate that for some reason there's different groups doing different things. Maybe it implies there's different, they think there's different Torahs. So we don't allow that. If there's a custom of a place, you have to do like the custom of a place. Amarle, Amina Lacha Ana Isura. To Amar of Shemen Bar Abba, Amar of Yochanan Lakaim Yishmei Purim Bizmanehem. Rav Shemen Bar Abba said in the name of Yochanan. What does it mean? Lakaim Yishmei Purim Bizmanehem, to fulfill the days of Purim in their times. Zmanim Harbe Tiknu Lahem Chachamim Va'at Amart Li Minhaga. So the fact that there are different places that read the Megillah on different times, that's not an indication of a fracture of customs and perhaps a suggestion of different Torahs. That's not what's going on. The original takana, the original decree was to give opportunity, but depending on need, to give opportunity for the reading of the Megillah at different times. V'hasam lav isura havya. So, and he's saying, you're talking to me about minhagim. This was an original decree. This is not a problem of doing different minhagim. So he says, "V'hasam lav isura havya." Also, on Erev Pesach, isn't there a prohibition? V'atznan halayla beishamai osrin ubeis hillel matirin. The night of the 14th, Beis Shammai forbids people to do creative work, and Beis Hillel permits it. Amarlei hasam haroeh. So Reish Lakish says to him, haroeh omer malacha hu delesle. In other words, so Reish Lakish is saying, in a case where you're saying that some people hold you can work and some people hold you don't work, there you shouldn't, if somebody's not working, they're not going to think he has a different custom than the person who's working. They're just going to think he has nothing to do. He doesn't have creative work to do. All right, so when it comes to Erev Pesach and when it comes to Purim, they have resolved that these are not issues. The fact that they have different customs, one has a custom to do work, one has a custom not to do work. That's not a problem, because the ones who are not doing work, it just looks like they don't have work to do. So that's not a problem of making separate communities with different things. It's the Jewish people can survive with people without being in violation of Lo Siskodedu by having some communities that work on Erev Pesach and some communities that don't work on Erev Pesach. And the Jewish people are also going to be okay with the different days of Purim. That's not going to be a contradiction to this problem of not having one community does this and one community that does that. But what about this? Beis Shammai matirin tzaros la'achim ubeis Hillel osri. Beis Shammai permits the co-wives to the brothers to do yibum, and Beis Hillel forbids it. Now you have a situation where Beis Shammai is going to do one way and Beis Hillel is going to do another way. That's the way the Mishnah set it up. It said Beis Shammai did one way, the school of Hillel did another way, and they still married each other. But why isn't it a problem of Lo Siskodedu? Why isn't it a problem of having one community that's doing one way and another community that's doing another way? Misavras asu Beis Shammai k'divreihem, lo asu Beis Shammai k'divreihem. You think Beis Shammai actually followed through and did yibum with the co-wives? Nah, they didn't do that. Rabbi Yochanan Omar asu v'asu. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan says no, they did. They followed through. Beplugta de Rav u'Shmuel, and this argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish was happening at the same time with Rav and Shmuel. The Rav Amar lo asu Beis Shammai k'divreihem u'Shmuel Amar asu v'asu. Rav says that Beis Shammai did not follow through, and Beis Hillel said they did. Now, when we first read that Mishnah, we took it for granted that everybody agreed that co-wives are forbidden, just like the erva. Beis Shammai did not agree. That was according to Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai does not agree. There are circumstances in which the co-wives would be permitted. So the question is, did they actually follow through? If you were amongst the school of Beis Shammai, was yibum happening with the co-wives of these arayas? So Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan argue about it. Reish Lakish says they did not, even though Beis Shammai held like that, they didn't actually follow through. Rabbi Yochanan said they did follow through, and same arguments happening between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says that they did not follow through, and Shmuel said they did. Amos. So when is this argument? Ilema Kodem Baskol? Is this happening before the Baskol? So the Baskol was that the halacha is like Beis Hillel always. This is a very difficult subject because we don't paskin halacha based on what happens from heaven. Lo b'shamayim. So how can a baskol, how can a voice from heaven tell us how to decide the law? They're saying halacha is like Beis Hillel always. So you have to say that the baskol is not telling us how to decide the law. The baskol is telling us the consequences. Even that is sort of difficult, but that they are somehow getting heavenly inspiration that when Beis Hillel makes a law, it's like the law of Beis Shammai doesn't exist. And even for Beis Shammai, it's going to be something like that. That's what they seem to be saying over here. Let's see. If you say it's before the Baskol, my time of demand Amar lo asu. So if you say it's before the Baskol, then why didn't Beis Shammai? Beis Shammai holds like that. They should do like that. It must be it's after the Baskol. My time of the man Amar asu. So now what's the thinking of the ones who said that they followed through? So again, before the Baskol, it's just like a regular argument. When people had arguments, they did like their opinion. Just because if we have an argument between the two of us, let's say Shmuel and Rav, Shmuel's going to do like his opinion, Rav's going to do like his opinion. So if you have an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai is going to follow through like their opinion, Beis Hillel is going to follow through like their opinion. But maybe you'll say after the Baskol, even Beis Shammai are being told you shouldn't follow through on your opinion. Something to that effect. So now they're going to try to work this out either way. If you want to say, I could say that it's before the Baskol. We could go into Beis Hillel Ruba. It's just that Beis Hillel had a majority. And we say you follow the majority. Laman da'amar lo asu daha Beis Hillel Ruba. So the ones who said that Beis Shammai didn't follow through, it's because they had a vote. They had a vote in the Sanhedrin, and Beis Hillel won. If Beis Hillel win in a vote in the Sanhedrin, that's it. That's the law. Uman da'amar asu. But what about the opinion that they did do? They followed through on it. Kiazlinan basaruba heicha de ki hadari ninhu. Aval Beis Shammai mechaditve. So Beis Shammai might have held the following, which is a sort of dangerous opinion, but they might have held the following. When do we say that you follow the majority? That's when the other people are on your level. In other words, they're as bright as you are. So if everybody in the room is, deserves to be in the room together, so then they have a vote, then it goes by the majority. But if you have people in the room that don't really belong because they're not as intelligent as the other people in the room, you might think that we don't go by the majority. This has been a discussion about voting in general. Every citizen has a vote. But there are those who question whether it makes sense that every citizen has a vote, and that could be the reason for the Electoral College that in the United States, that the reason of the imposition of the Electoral College was because people were concerned that the average voter is not going to be informed enough to make a good decision. So therefore, there was this sort of backup system in case something stupid was about to happen. They, intelligent minds could intervene and prevent a disaster, something like that. So maybe Beis Shammai felt that Beis Hillel had greater numbers, but included in those numbers were people that really shouldn't have been voting at all. And if you want, I could explain this after the Baskol. Laman Damar Lo Asu, according to the one who says that Beis Shammai did not follow through Don Nafka Baskol. The reason they didn't follow through is because there was a Baskol. Umanda Amar Asu, but according to the one who says that they did follow through, Rabbi Yeshua he to Amar Ein Mashkichim Baskol. They hold like Rabbi Yeshua, who says we don't listen to Baskols. Now that means that the other opinion, this opinion that keeps on getting quoted in the Gemara, that there was a Baskol that said that we hold like like Beis Hillel, is not like Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua's opinion, which comes up in the famous case of the Tanur Shalachnoi, in that oven case with Rabbi Eliezer, and a voice comes out at the end and says, "Why aren't you doing like Rabbi Eliezer? Why the halach is always like him?" And Rabbi Yeshua points up and goes, "Lo b'shamayim he." We don't decide halacha from the heavens. That is always presented as agreed upon by everybody. That kind of thing. But here, they're putting it on the side that you would think is a minority.
Say, doesn't matter what you say.
Right. This is not heaven. We're supposed to be deciding this. But then they bring up this baskol that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. And then that's always quoted as, yeah, everybody agrees on that. And then they're putting it now on the other side of Rabbi Yoshua, who said we don't decide law from the heavens. So now you've got this, each one is presented as the thing that we always agree on. Now they're presenting them opposite each other. That's a real meditation one.
We already, this has already been in the Gemara, the thing about Yeshua and Eliezer, we already.
No.
But they're referring to this.
Once the first word in brachos is mentioned, it's like it got dropped, like a Netflix serial. It all gets dropped on the same moment. That's how they treat it. It's like you know everything from the first minute. They're already asking questions from truma, from kohanim who are eating truma, and all sorts of other things. It's like it all happens simultaneously, and everything's known and everything's interconnected. That's another thing.
That's you've already got that already.
Right. So even though we haven't, right, they're not expecting a kind of that it's unfolding. But until Netflix, we didn't understand this Gemara. There's like revelations that come from heaven that only we could possibly understand, but the previous generations just had to take it on faith. All right. Umanda Amar Asu, Karina and Khan Losis Godaду. So now this was how we started the whole thing about making the little groups. So now they say, according to the one who says that even after the Baskol, they continued to do what they were doing. Oh no, first they said, I'm sorry. No, they said there, why do they keep on doing it? Because they hold like Rabbi Yeshua, who said, Ein mashkich Baskol. All right. Umanda Amar Asu. Now, according to Beis Shammai, if Beis Shammai continued to do what they were doing, so how could they do that? After all, you're not supposed to have one group practicing one way and another group practicing another way. By the way, when it came to the Sanhedrin, this is this comes up in a discussion of Achrei Rabim Lahatos, you go by the majority. So one of the things we learn that the verse itself seems to be talking about the Sanhedrin, you go by the majority. If there's a vote, you go by the majority. So in the discussion of how the Sanhedrin works, this point is made by several that including Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, and Moshe Shapiro brought this up in Shir once, that if the way the Sanhedrin worked was, if you they would have a vote, they'd have discussion, and then they'd have a vote. And obviously they don't want it to be unanimous. They want it to be that there were vigorous positions made. And um, and good arguments made on both sides. But once they vote, it's presented to the outside world as unanimous. In other words, the original vote could be, let's say, was a full Sanhedrin. So the original vote could be 35 to 36. But once they've voted, then that's the end of the discussion. And everybody within the Sanhedrin now is expected to adopt the majority opinion. And when they present it to the world, they present it as one opinion, not like in the Supreme Court where they present the minority opinions, or not like the Mishnah, where the Mishnah presents the minority opinions. If you had an actual vote in the Sanhedrin, you would have the vote, then you'd have the conclusion, then the Sanhedrin would present it as a unified opinion. In the Mishnah, already, because those are not representing decisions made in the Sanhedrin, you start to have, you already have minority opinions mentioned, and lahavdil, some place like the Supreme Court, but that's not how it was supposed to be. But again, we saw that maybe they didn't feel that somehow the majority that was happening is what the Torah was talking about, because they felt that people were being included that weren't of stature, that deserve to be there. But anyways, how do they justify that there's more than one group, that one group's doing one thing and another group's doing another thing? So Karina Khan losis godudu losasa agudas agudas Amar Abaye kia amrina losis godudu. So Abaye says, when do we say losis godudu kigon shtei bate dinim be'irachas? If you have two courts in one town. Halalu marin kediver beis Shammai v'halalu marin kediver beis Hillel. These ones are holding like Beis Shammai, and these ones are holding like Beis Hillel. Aval shtei bate dinim b'shtei ayaros. But if you have two basins in two separate towns, then less lambal, you don't have to worry about it. The concern is in the same town. But if you have two different towns doing it, for some reason, they weren't as concerned. So you could still have like a Beis Shammai town that did it like Beis Shammai. That would not be a problem. The problem is if you have two basins in the same town. Amarle Rava v'ha Beis Shammai Beis Hillel kishtei bate dinim be'irachas dami. But Beis Shammai Beis Hillel should have been treated like two basins in one town, because they often lived in the same towns. Elama Rava, so Rava says ki amrina losis godudu. So that was Abaye's option. Now comes Rava. Elama Rava ki amrina losis godudu. When do we say losis godudu? Kigon based in bir achas peleg morin kediver beis Shammai u peleg morin kediver beis Hillel. One basin. Within the basin, you have a group that paskin like Beis Shammai, and a group that paskin like Beis Hillel, that beside the law of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Avashtei bate dinim bir achas, but two separate basins, less hamba. It's not a concern. It's a concern with one basin. It doesn't sound like in the beginning, right? It sounded like we just don't want two practices to be around in Israel. Then they further narrowed it and says, no, it's really only about one town. And now they're even further narrowing it. It's really one basin. Toshma, come in here. Bimkomasher Rebbe Eliezer, how you kursin 18 lasos bechamim b'Shabbos, lasos barzel. So we saw this in Shabbos. Today we have a bris, and we're having a discussion of a bris milah on Shabbos. So the Rebbe Eliezer was of the opinion that once the Torah says that bris milah sets aside Shabbos, if you need to, you can make the actual scalpel that you're going to do the bris with. You can actually make it on Shabbos. You can even cut down the wood to make the coals so that you can then fashion the the scalpel that you're going to use to cut to do the circumcision. So when in the areas where he lived, Rebbe Eliezer lived, they actually did it. And in the place of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who disagreed, I'm sorry, a different thing. In the place of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you ochlim psar of bechalav. Rabbi Yossi Aglili held that you could eat chicken or any bird with milk. He didn't hold that it was forbidden to eat it. So even though he was not the opinion that eventually rules the day, but in his places they actually followed his ruling. Bimkomash Rabbi Eliezer in Bimkomash Rabbi Akiva lo. So it sounds like in the place of Rabbi Eliezer, they permitted, going back to the circumcision case, in the case of Rabbi Eliezer, they permitted, fashioning the knife that's going to be used for the circumcision, even if it meant cutting down wood and making calls, etc. In the place of Rabbi Akiva, who said you're not allowed to, you're supposed to make all the preparations before Shabbos. You are allowed to desecrate Shabbos. The actual circumcision itself would be a desecration of Shabbos, so it does set aside Shabbos. But everything else, whatever you can do before Shabbos, you're supposed to do it before Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva said, any creative work that you could get done before Shabbos doesn't push off Shabbos. So we already explained, by the way, and this is why it was why are you bringing this up? In the place of Rebbe Eliezer, they did like Rebbe Eliezer. In the place of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, they did like Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So why are you bringing it up? We already said in different places, as long as the custom is in different places, it's okay. Udekorila, my korila. So what was the question? Sakodaita Hamina mishum chumra de Shabbos kemakom echad dami komash malon. So you might think, by the way, we just had a bris Gemara. You just walked out when we had a bris Gemara.
Kidding.
I needed witnesses. I had Gary, but I needed 2 witnesses. But we had it because the question was, because the Gemara said in the place of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer held that if a bris was on Shabbos, you're allowed to do whatever preparations you need to do in order to make the bris happen. So you could actually make the knife if you needed to make a knife. Rabbi Akiva held that you have to do everything that can be done before, has to be done before, and they don't push off Shabbos, the other thing. If you could make the knife before, then you have to make the knife before. So they said, in the place of Rebbe Eliezer, they did like Rebbe Eliezer. And then they brought Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who said that you're actually allowed to eat birds, let's say chicken, with milk. He held that. So in the place of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, they would actually do it. So doesn't that? So then the Gemara says, why are you bringing this up? We already said if they're in different towns, it's okay. We already said that if they live in different towns, the people can paskin like, how they paskin. So they said, maybe you would think that because of Shabbos, for instance, that it's so serious, they made it as if they were all in one town, even though they were separate towns. So this tells you not. Toshma, Rabbi Avo.
Rabbi saying what he was doing was wrong.
No, he could. You would have thought he was wrong for doing. People were wrong for doing like him, and they answered, no, it's a separate town. We already said separate towns. You can do like separate towns. You might have thought Shabbos is different, so serious that we don't even let separate towns do this separately. The answer is no, we do. Toshma, Rabbi Avo ki ikla la asrei, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi hava metaltel shraga. So Rabbi Avo, when he got to the town of Yeshua ben Levi, he carried a lamp with him. In other words, it was already lit. So he held you could do that because in Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi held like Rabbi Shimon, who holds that he has a very narrow view of muktzah. So he held you could move it. But when he got to the town of Rabbi Yochanan, he didn't, because Rabbi Yochanan held like Rabbi Yehuda, and who was more expansive about muktzah. So in one town he held like the posek of that town, which was Rabbi Shimon Levi. In the other town he held like the posek of that town, which was Rabbi Yochanan. So again, the Gemara says, "V'hai my kushya." V'lo amrinan mekom shani anon hachi kamrinan Rabbi Avo heichi avid hacha hache v'heichi avid hacha hache. So at first they're saying, what's the problem? You're allowed to, we said you're allowed to have separate places. So they're saying, yeah, but he is doing, 1 week he's doing like this, and 1 week he's doing like that. He doesn't, how can he do that? Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Shimon Levi Sphirale. So you could say Rabbi Avo held like Rabbi Shimon Levi, and that it was permitted. So this is what you could say. He doesn't really hold of both of them. He doesn't switch his custom depending on where he is. He held like the lenient opinion. He didn't do it in the town of Rabbi Yochanan to show honor to Rabbi Yochanan, because it's disrespectful if you're in a town not to do like him. So Ramosha Shapiro, there's a Shemitah permit. There's a certain kind of there's a Shemitah permit that comes from Rabbi Yosef Karo. Without going into the details of it, there's a Shemitah permit that comes from Rabbi Yosef Karo, and there's a chumrah that people do during Shemitah. That, in other words, it's sort of like they're not willing to rely on the permit of Rabbi Yosef Karo. It's called Otzer Beistin. So Ramosha Shapiro, of blessed memory, decried the fact that they advertised this severity in Tzfat, because Tzfat was the town of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbi Yosef Karo, according to Rabbi Avad Yosef, is the posek for all of Israel. He should be considered the posek for all of Israel, but at least in Tzfat, where he lived. So to advertise that you're not relying on the psak of Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat is it's a disrespect to the man's honor. So this is a similar kind of thing. You're in Rabbi Yochanan's town, and Rabbi Yochanan was alive at this time. So you're in Rabbi Yochanan's town. It's disrespectful to act not in accordance with his ruling. Va'ika shma. Demoda leshama. So Rabbi Avo had his he made known to his Gabbai too that it is permitted to do this, but we're not going to do it in Rabbi Yochanan's place because of his honor. Toshma afapi she'elu osrin ve'elu matirin lo nimnu beisham v'liosa nashim beis Hillel. Even though the Mishnah said, this sounds like it's a brisa, but this is our Mishnah. They're quoting from our Mishnah. Even though Beis Hillel said it's forbidden, the co-wives, and Beis Shammai are saying it's permitted, they didn't stop marrying each other's children. Lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai, and not the other way around. So even though in this case it's Beis Hillel are being more severe and Beis Shammai are being more lenient, and even so, Beis Hillel's had their kids married children from Beis Shammai. So if you're going to say Beis Shammai never did it, so why do they have to prevent from marrying each other? Beis Shammai never did it. And if they did, why didn't they prevent from marrying them? Bishla Beis Shammai Beis Hillel lo nimnu de bnei chayve lavin nimnu. Ala Beis Hillel Beis Shammai lo nimnu bnei chayve krisus mamzer nimnu. According to Beis Shammai, the worst thing that could happen is you did a negative commandment, which is bad, but it's not going to affect the status of the children. But according to Beis Hillel, this is a Kares level penalty. If somebody did Yibum with the co-wife, according to Beis Hillel, the children would be mamzerim. And maybe you'll hold, maybe Beis Hillel doesn't, because again, if they followed through and did this Yibum and had children, according to Beis Hillel, those children are mamzerim. Beis Hillel can't marry, their children are not going to marry mamzerim. And maybe you'll say they don't hold their mamzerim because this is achi of kares, it's not death from Beis Din. And maybe they hold that a mamzer is only from death from Beis Din. Ha'om Rebbe Lazar, afa pishin nechlu Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, but saras modim shein mamzer ela mimish isuro iser erva anush kares. Rebbe Lazar says that they both agreed that if that a mamzer comes from a union that has a kares level penalty, alav shmamina lo asu. So you must say that Beis Shammai must not have followed through, because otherwise Beis Hillel is not going to marry. They have their kids marry a mamzer. No, laolam asu. No, they did it to modi lu parshi. What it means is Beis Shammai would tell them that kid over there, that kid, according to you, that kid's a mamzer. According to us, he's perfectly okay. But according to you, that kid's a mamzer. So that's what it meant. And this makes sense. The Katani Seifa, it teaches at the end, Kola Taharos, Kola Tmeos, Shayu Elam Ataran, Elam Atan Lano Nimnu, Osin Taharos, Elu Agabe Elu. So the similar kind of issue comes up with what's pure and what's not pure about vessels, etc., or things like that. So they would borrow vessels from each other. So if you say, because they would say to him, hey, according to you, that vessel is tameh, but according to you, that vessel is kosher. That would make sense why they didn't hesitate to borrow from each other. But if you're going to say that they didn't go out of their way to make it known, Beis Shammai didn't have a problem because whatever Beis Hillel said was tameh, whatever the arguments are, there were certain arguments. In those arguments, Beis Hillel would say they're impure, and Beis Shammai would say they're pure. So Beis Shammai doesn't have a problem borrowing from Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, lama lo nimnu. But Beis Hillel, why didn't they have a problem borrowing from Beis Shammai? Taharas to Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Tmeos nimnu. After all, in their arguments, what Beis Shammai permitted, according to Beis Hillel, is impure. So why wouldn't Beis Hillel have a problem borrowing them? So it must be, like we were saying, that they told them. That's why there wasn't a problem, because each side would tell the other side, hey, that's no good for you. That, it's good for us, but it's not good for you. Why did they have to bring this other thing about purity and impurity? They already brought the thing about the co-wives that they would let them know. So once we know, they let them know. They let them know about everything. You might think that somebody's a co-wife. That word gets out. That a particular vessel is impure or pure, that doesn't necessarily get out. Gufa Amar Balazar, Afa Pishneflu Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, Bitzaros Modim Shein Mamzer Elamish Isur Isur Erba Anush Kares. Even though they disagree about the co-wives question, they agree on this principle that a mamzer is only the result of a kares level penalty. There has to be an erva kares level penalty. Man modim, who's agreeing to who? Ilema Beis Shammai leBeis Hillel. Is it Beis Shammai agreeing to Beis Hillel? Shita. Bnei Chayve Laving Sherin. So that's no problem, because they hold they are only at a prohibition level. Ela Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. We have to be talking about Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai. He gufa chayve krisasu. What is this word? They agree with each other, even though they disagree over here. They agree. What do you mean they agree? They don't agree. I mean, they might agree with a principle, but they're not agreeing in this case because Beis Hillel holds that in this case they are chayve krisus. So therefore, these children should be mamzerim, and Beis Shammai is holding they're not, so they shouldn't be mamzerim. So why are you saying they agree? Like the agreement language is funny. La'olam Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. We're talking about Beis Shammai is agreeing to Beis Hillel. La'fuke to Rabbi Akiva to disagree with Rabbi Akiva. To Amar Yesh Mamzer. Lavin. Rabbi Akiva has this opinion. It is not halachic, but according to Rabbi Akiva, if you have a union, even at a basic prohibition level, the children that are a result of it are mamzerim. We don't agree with that. And they're saying Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree not like him. That it has to be a kores level penalty. But like it seems like according to Rabbi Akiva, a Kohen who marries a divorcee, the children should be a mamzer. We don't hold that. Komash Malon to ein mamzer mechayv elaven. This tells you we don't hold like Rabbi Akiva that a mamzer is not from chayv elaven, from basic entry level prohibition, but it has to be a kores level penalty. Okay, we are going to stop here, and we are going to continue from here
Nice
the
to
next
take a
day.
little break.